All right, here we are. Lawyer talk. They don't teach you that in law school, Italian style.
Luigi
Mangione. Do you say the E or is the E silent? Mangione or Mangione?
I'm not the
we need Paul Scarcella down here, our colleague, to tell us how that works. You have to be from Youngstown to understand that one. But anyway, so they don't teach you that in law school, where we are LawyerTalkPodcast.com, taking on stuff. You know, you guys in law school, by the way, we've got Troy here and Bella here, our resident law school experts. And, you know, you guys are getting the education, but, the real world application is sometimes lacking, and maybe for good reason. They can't teach you everything.
No.
But that's why we're here, because we're going to help. And your questions that you guys come with are awesome, because they, you can tell it. They've got you thinking in law school about sort of the backbone of the standards, but then there's like the more you know, the more you don't, and you start to think, well, wait a minute. How does that work? How is that not double jeopardy, which is what we're going to get to here? And how possibly could this be going on? And then, have you guys suffered from the Thanksgiving or the dinners with your family where they're asking you legal questions and you have no idea what the answer is?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I get that still. They're like, well, I'm trying to adopt. I'm trying to blah, blah, blah. What is it? Or somebody asked me about easements one time. I'm like,
it always is like the minor stuff that not in the area of I don't know. I'll get non-criminal questions. I'm like, I have no idea.
Right.
Or can your lawyer draft this will? Can he deal with this neighbor's fence? And I'm like, I don't know. A lot of most of the time, I'm like, that's not really worth the money.
Yeah. Do you want to pay?
Right.
Yeah. If you don't want to pay, then you don't. Yeah. But So somebody asked me to do an easement thing the other day, and I'm just like, look, I could figure this out, but just call somebody who does it. Look, I know what an easement is. I know generally how it works. How do I file an easement in a small county in Southern Ohio? I have no idea. I'd have to figure it all out, and I could, but I don't want to.
Yeah,
I don't want to. All right. Well, anyway, one of the topics that has been sort of this. It's funny how stuff makes the news. I mean, Mangione, how long ago did he shoot this guy?
No, not October.
November.
I want to say November sounds right. Are we talking about at Thanksgiving? You think?
Yeah, I think it was before Thanksgiving even.
Yeah.
Right about that time. So.
Yeah.
There's an execution style. Luigi just executes the CEO of United Health. And executes. I mean, laying in wait, murders him, and it gets all this fanfare. There's people saying, well, yes, go applaud because he's killed somebody. And I would think, you freaking morons, he's killed somebody. There's a guy who didn't have Christmas. There's a guy who didn't have Thanksgiving. There's a guy who's not going to get to see his kids grow up, and I don't care what your stance is. I try not to get political on this, and I don't think this is political. To me, this is just human. You don't kill people.
Yeah.
They find a different way to address your grievances. You don't execute people. But anyway, he's been charged. Luigi has been charged with murder in New York State Court.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we're gonna try to cover two things here because one of them is gonna be his arraignment. His attorney brought up some interesting defenses, but the first thing I want to touch on was on December 18th. An FBI special agent made a criminal complaint in federal court on Luigi. And I was kind of confused. A federal criminal complaint, is that the same as a state criminal complaint? Like when a cop comes in and gives probable cause, is that pretty much what it is on the federal end too? Okay.
So what you're talking about is this. There are two ways you get charged. We deal with criminal complaints in both misdemeanors and felonies, but you're talking specifically about felonies. And there are basically two general ways that felony charges are instigated. The first would be a grand jury convenes, meaning there's a room full of people, usually 20, 30 people. In federal court, I don't know how many they bring in. But the prosecutor presents a case, maybe calls witnesses like police officers or other even civilian witnesses, sometimes just reads complaints or reads reports to the grand jury and says, all right, who thinks that there's been a murder? Here's the elements of murder. Who thinks? And they get a vote. Boom, we've got a murder charge. Now you're indicted on murder. The rub there is that's a secret proceeding. It's very difficult to even get access to transcripts from grand jury proceedings. A defendant does not have a right to go testify in grand jury proceedings. I, as the defendant's lawyer, don't have a right to be there, even know it's happening. Sometimes I'm invited. Every now and then there's a few counties that used to do this, where no matter what, they would invite your client to go testify in the grand jury. I've done it maybe once, and it was a self-defense type case, and it was, I don't want to say it was wired in, but the prosecutor was sort of sympathetic to my client's cause. But generally speaking, it's a secret proceeding. They get an indictment, and gal charged with a felony. The second way is called a criminal complaint. And, not every state is going to have the same terminology here, but we'll just talk federal. A federal criminal complaint, Troy, you already described it. What was it?
It's a probable cause. It's a motion for probable cause, and imagine there's a probable cause hearing in order for a judge to then indict the.
So what happens? A federal officer or a state officer maybe observes or has facts developed that are sufficient to warrant a felony charge. That officer or agent in federal court is then going to create an affidavit, and they're going to swear out a complaint that says, I hereby say that this guy has committed the following crimes. And then often, and now pretty regularly in federal court, you'll see an affidavit that goes along with it, a statement of facts that goes along with it. And the statement of facts is designed to establish probable cause. Interestingly, that's the same probable cause that the grand jury was deciding. So in the secret proceeding, the grand jury decided there was probable cause. In the public affidavit, there's been an establishment of probable cause that then has to be verified if it's going to continue along the complaint route by a judge later. We'll get to that. But we have, as citizens, one of the protections we have is probable cause is required to charge somebody with a crime. Any ideas why? Like, what's the basis?
Just so you're not pressing charges for frivolous.
I'd agree with
Yeah,
frivolous. You gotta have some reasoning. As to
Yeah, there's got to be
rights-
some grounds.
Our rights are almost always tied to overreaching government action or corrupt government action. We don't want a corrupt government actor, a prosecutor, to be able to unilaterally charge people with crimes and prosecute. The idea is there should be an independent review to determine whether there's probable cause. The prosecutor says so, but there's got to be at least some independent review. Now, the old saying is prosecutors could indict a ham sandwich. They're the ones in charge of the proceeding, and they can get an indictment. But at least there's something. You have a right to a grand jury proceeding, and returning something called a bill of indictment, meaning a document charging somebody with a crime formally after a grand jury has reviewed it and at least voted on it and established sufficient probable cause. On the criminal complaint side, it's far more public. The grand jury meets in secret. The criminal complaint then proceeds openly. Guy gets charged. You get charged by way of a criminal complaint in federal court. Within a day or so, they're going to do. Sometimes I get a call that day. Hey, I heard you representing so and so. We need you here at 2:00 over here in district court. And there's something called an initial appearance. An initial appearance is where a judge informs my client what he's charged with and what the possible consequences are, and we have a bond hearing. We have some sort of consideration of whether my client's going to be detained. Often that's continued for a full-blown detention hearing where there's background checks and other things. And there's all sorts of federal rules on this I'm not going to dig into, but you federal practitioners understand. But there's something called a detention hearing, which is really a bond hearing. And but the idea is you drag the person into court so there can be some judicial review over the process. Then, if it's going to head on down that road as a criminal complaint, the court will schedule something called a preliminary hearing, or also known as a probable cause hearing. A lot of jurisdictions call it a PC hearing or probable cause hearing. That is designed to do what the grand jury did, except now it's a judge. And so a preliminary hearing would work this way. You're charged by way of a criminal complaint. Within a certain time frame, they have to get you in for probable cause review or a preliminary hearing where the prosecutor now is going to have to come into court, call witnesses. The defense has a right to be there in public and cross-examine witnesses. Mm-hmm. There are different rules in different jurisdictions about whether the rules of evidence apply and how exactly things are supposed to go down. But at a preliminary hearing, I love them because I get to hear the evidence. And that's why prosecutors don't love them, because I get to hear the evidence.
Yeah.
And not just because they don't want to share the evidence. I'm not impugning bad motive, but it's a pain in the ass. They got to get their case together quicker.
And they got to have witnesses. They got to subpoena.
Witnesses.
People got to show up.
People got to show up. I get to cross-examine agents
mm-hmm.
and ask for their reports and deal. And I get early discovery in a case. In Franklin County, Ohio, there has been one preliminary hearing the entire time I've been practicing law, which was since 1996. I have been November 95. Anyway,
we're not keeping track. You're fine.
Yeah, we're not keeping track. But there's been one preliminary hearing. There was a case, a very famous case. There was a highway shooter who down on the south side of Columbus was perching on various places down on 270 and shooting drivers as they drove down the highway. It was scary stuff. It was like sniper stuff. And they had a prelim in that case for one reason or another. They didn't have I don't know why they ended up doing it, but they did. But most of the time, prosecutors dismiss cases or they directly indict them before they have to do the prelim. So, like around here, they call it, I got a future. Guys will say, I got a future. And they don't even know what that means. But what they're really saying is, I was charged by way of a criminal complaint, but then the prosecutor dismissed it before a preliminary hearing and before the prosecutor's office had a chance to indict it. So it was dismissed for a future indictment, meaning it'll probably be indicted at some point, but we're not going to go through the rigmarole of a preliminary hearing. Now, why that process? Any ideas?
How I would view it is they'd want to do that to maybe get the guy arrested if they think he might be a flight risk. So you're thinking, let's get this guy cuffed up and then we can get the indictment, but we just want to do it now. Like, we don't want to wait to get a grand jury together and do all that. Like, we just need to, we want to at least get him in jail tonight. That's how I would view it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so think old John Wayne movie, the old Rooster Cogburn movie. In the beginning of that movie, he's arrested. I don't know. I don't remember who the guy he arrested in the first scene of that movie, but it might have been Lucky Ned Pepper. I don't remember. But there's a character he arrests, and he drags this guy into court, and they have essentially a preliminary hearing. And, old Rooster Cogburn, John Wayne, in his crotchety old way, is saying, well, I shot him, and blah, blah, blah. And then but they don't establish probable cause, and the guy is released. But I think what really happened there was a preliminary hearing. Now, the problem is, like, think Old West or think small counties. They don't always have a grand jury sitting around to indict somebody. So the idea is you can charge somebody by way of a complaint, get them in custody, conduct a preliminary hearing, and then hold them and bind them over for an indictment in the future where they're held. So now they're bound over, and they can be charged and later indicted, but there's been a probable cause review that justifies keeping the guy in detention or holding him with whatever, or even if he's released, there are conditions. So they hold him over and or bound him over, and now he can be held or at least monitored under supervision for an indictment in the future.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. The problem is Luigi, I don't think is a flight risk because he's in jail already. So that's why I'm like, I understand why you would do a criminal complaint before an indictment to try and get him in under arrest. And that's what it says at the bottom of a criminal complaint is like, and we'd like to arrest Luigi. And I just think it's weird. It's like, he's already under arrest. What do you mean?
Well, I don't. So the real question is, why are the feds getting involved in a state court murder case?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think? I don't profess to have all the. I got some ideas, but
if I had to like just shoot ideas off the hip, maybe they're just. It's national coverage. They want to be involved. They think they can do it better than the state.
Maybe they're worried about what the state's going to do with the case.
Yes. I think that's a problem. I mean, they put the counts in the criminal complaint. There's 4 counts. There's stalking, murder through use of a firearm, and firearms offense. That's the 4 counts.
Well, this is worthy of a little bit of discussion before we answer the question about why the feds are doing this. It's not obvious that the feds have jurisdiction over most crimes. In order to have federal jurisdiction, it used to be like, well, you have to cross state lines or, the Mann Act or whatever. But generally, the federal U.S. Code, which is the Federal Criminal Code, is designed to deal with federal offenses. And the feds have jurisdiction over what's the big jurisdictional trigger in federal court? Do you guys had con law yet?
I mean, I have con law. I mean, it has to be like a constitutional issue. That's how I just always seen it.
And what's the clause? Do you guys remember the clause that basically triggers most federal jurisdiction?
I feel
commerce.
Like, commerce
clause, right? So if it impacts interstate commerce, in theory, Congress can regulate it. Mm-hmm. And by regulate it, I mean they can pass laws dealing with it. So a lot of federal crimes have to do with interstate commerce. Like think drug trafficking.
Yeah.
Now think bank robbery because they're federal institutions. It's like the feds have jurisdiction over these things. Now, generally speaking, this kind of street crime is left to the states.
Yeah.
They states deal with murder cases all the time. Not the feds. And there's only like a handful of ways, maybe 10 ways, I think. I had a federal murder recently, or I had to research this recently. And there's like a handful of ways how the feds can take over or can charge somebody with murder. And a lot of times it has to do with murdering a federal agent, committing a murder on state or on federal property, like in a state park or a federal park, or
Indian Reserve, like that kind of deal.
maybe. And then your status as a federal employee, maybe. There's a few of them, but it's not ubiquitous, meaning it's not like state court where they're going to have jurisdiction over any murder. Most states will have jurisdiction over murders. So here the feds have taken over a murder case, and one of the ways apparently is stalking and then committing a murder as a result of stalking under this charge that they have accused this guy or Mangione with. But why then? Why? So they can do it. And that's true of a lot of things. So somebody could be charged in state court with buying and selling drugs. And they could also be charged in federal court with buying and selling drugs. Usually there's some sort of comedy, not comedy like funny, but comity, like agreement, understanding between the federal and state about who's going to take it. And around here anyway, there used to be a lot of back and forth. I think they cooperated a lot, and maybe less than they used to. But it used to be understood. Say on a this would come up a lot on child pornography cases. There was a joint federal state task force, and certain cases would go to the state level, certain cases would go to the federal level, and that could greatly dictate, maybe in ways you would think are the opposite, but that could greatly dictate what happens with a case. There are times it might be better to have a dope case or a drug case in federal court than state, and vice versa. But anyway,
being on a child porn task force sounds like a brutal job.
Well, you know what they do? They have this. There's computer software that somebody's created that monitors. They tag images. So what they have are these images that are known to be child pornography. Meaning it's horrible. I mean, this stuff sucks. So we'll just talk about it. There's images that have underage kids performing sexual acts or naked or presented in bad ways. And those are tagged with data references or whatever code is with it. So, they can follow, they tag them and then follow those images.
It's like tagging animals in the wild, pretty much.
They follow them through the Ethernet or through the internet. And this software can tell where they're getting downloaded and where they're going. And so that's, they're people whose job is to go monitor that stuff.
Wow.
But people get charged for downloading or possessing child pornography, and those things. Somebody's got to decide where the case is going to get prosecuted, in federal or state court. It can be both.
Mm-hmm. It
can be both. But why do it in both places? It just seems like such a waste.
I didn't even think you could do it in both places. That's like when this was going on and the state's talking about we're going to continue prosecuting him in the state, and then like now the federal wants to take it. I was like, how can you do 2 in 1? It doesn't make sense to me.
Right. You think double jeopardy.
Yeah. I mean,
but double jeopardy applies to the same governmental entity. So the same entity can't put you twice in jeopardy, but a different entity in theory can. So in theory, you could be charged with bank robbery in state court, and for the same bank robbery, you could be charged in federal court. It doesn't happen much.
He was arrested in Pennsylvania. So in theory, Pennsylvania could still go after him too.
Well, for what crime?
I think just like what they caught him with, the firearm, fake ID, money.
If he committed crimes in Pennsylvania, he could be prosecuted in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes you have like this, call it like the Bonnie and Clyde thing, where they're just going state to state to state, or say in one state rather, a county to county to county. We have multi-county indictments. Theoretically, venue could apply in any one of those counties or jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. Let's consider them the same for this. Could apply there, but often there's an agreement. The counties will sort of say, "Look, you take it all." And we're going to, any case that happened in Fairfield County, we'll just let Delaware County deal with it, or vice versa. Sometimes it's prosecuted in both, and we're sort of playing, matchmaker. It's like, so-and-so said they do this. Well, yeah, but she said over here in this case they would do this. Would you do this if they do that? I've done that. I mean, I've had plenty of situations like, look, he's going to plead guilty in Delaware to this case. How about you dismiss yours? And we add a little extra in Delaware, and then I call the Delaware, hey, they said they'd dismiss if you just add a little extra here. And I'm trying to wheel and deal the whole case. Mm-hmm. It gets confusing if they don't work and play well together. And not all counties do. And here the feds get involved, and maybe they don't trust what the states are going to do with it. I don't know. Maybe they're worried that New York doesn't have a handle on this thing. It may be, we took apart, I think on one of these shows, the New York murder charge and what made it murder and what didn't make it murder, aggravated versus not. Maybe it's more severe and based on some factual nuance in the federal courts, but somebody in federal court wanted the case. And what I don't know, what I would like to know, is what communication occurred between the federal prosecutors or agencies and the state prosecutors or agencies that resulted in this. Because, I mean, can you just imagine you're the state court prosecutor and you pick up the paper the next day and, wait a minute, you guys indicted him too?
Yeah.
I didn't know that was going to happen.
I mean, I can imagine that being frustrating. I imagine there would be communication. Like, I feel like that'd be really frustrating to, like, try and do your job and then...
You would think.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I would think. I mean,
you would think that the feds would be courteous enough to pick up the phone and say, hey, what are you doing with it? We're going to take it.
Yeah.
There's another big case this occurred on, but it was after the fact. You guys, probably the biggest case of your lifetime.
Biggest case of my lifetime. Feds took over. What state? You're going to give me the state at least?
No.
What? You just guess. Oh shoot. I don't know.
It only like triggered race riots for weeks and weeks and weeks on end.
George Floyd got taken up by the feds?
Chauvin, Derek Chauvin.
Oh,
after he was prosecuted in state court, there was a federal prosecution. And I think he ended up cutting a deal
because
in
he was a
court.
police officer? Or?
A civil rights violation.
Yeah. I do remember this. Okay.
Yep.
I don't think that even got I don't think the federal part got any coverage, at least to my knowledge.
I watched it. I think he cut a deal in federal court for one reason or another. But, that case, that was one of those cases where the feds took it. Like, they really, really wanted him to be guilty, I guess. But that happened in that case. And it's happened in a few that I've worked on. But most of the time, I worked on another, I think it was, you were here for the tail end of it. It was a homicide case that was being prosecuted as a drug case in federal court up in Toledo area.
Yeah.
And it didn't make much sense why and how all that happened. We sort of got through it. I'm not going to go into the depths of that case because it's crazy. But that started as a state court murder case and ended as a drug case in federal court. But there, at least, the state court let it go and let the feds take it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we had to worry about throughout that case was whether, even if I won the case in federal court, was my client going to be prosecuted right out of the frying pan into the fryer in state court?
Yeah.
And you have to worry about that because jeopardy on one doesn't attach to the other.
It's just kind of crazy to think that, but I mean, it makes sense, I guess. I just think it's kind of crazy to be charged two different areas to fight two different trials. I would want the government to communicate with each other. I would want the prosecutor to work with the federal government.
You would think.
I worked for the government. I understand. Everybody thinks it's like, I think the McDonald's meme is like very good, where it's like the picture of the Big Mac and like what you think the federal government is,
right? And
then it's the picture of the Big Mac like just absolutely destroyed that they hand to you, like how the federal government actually operates. It's like, and like it was always just a meme in the military. I was like, everybody thinks it's like the most smoothest running operation ever. Everybody's just all in cahoots with each other, and literally like I can't even access the Wi-Fi here. Like, it's terrible.
Well, you had another question you sent me, which is about the arraignment. Yes.
So if you want to move away from the federal, I think that mainly got me. The next step then is the judge. There's going to be an arrest issued by the judge if they find that there's probable cause, right?
All right. So in federal court, there's a criminal complaint. The federal court will bring in the defendant and conduct an initial appearance. The federal court will then schedule something called a preliminary hearing or probable cause hearing. And if the court finds probable cause, the case will be held. The defendant will be bound over for indictment, meaning now the time frames are sort of, there's relief on the time frames for the federal government to actually get an indictment, and they can take their time, convene a grand jury, and indict the guy. So that's happening in federal court. And all the while, I think Mangione's been indicted actually in New York, where he has been charged and actually formally indicted, and now the case is proceeding. Now, once somebody's indicted, the courts in both federal and state, they have to conduct something called an arraignment. An arraignment is basically a time where the defendant enters a plea. Yeah. Either guilty or not guilty.
Yeah, so he came forward on the state one on that arraignment, plead not guilty to everything. He was kind of it was kind of crazy. Him and his the attorney matched. It was the big meme. They had the exact same outfit on. It was weird. But you ever do that with clients? Let's match.
Look, I'm going to federal court. I'm wearing a blue suit.
That's the rule, blue?
I like to wear a blue suit when I go to federal court.
Okay.
Not always, but that's what I try to. Red, white, and blue.
And the attorney raised some interesting arguments. I don't think it's crazy. It kind of reminds me of the Coburger though, where arguments prejudicial. There's no way to get a fair trial here. brought up the statements by the mayor, which was the exact same things that Koberger's attorneys brought up for change of venue, and talked about the perp walk and like all this. And it kind of had me guessing, is there ever a situation where a defendant can have no fair trial in the United States? And what do we do then? Do we just,
I mean, look,
in theory,
in theory, is it possible? I guess. There's never been such a case, and there probably never will be, because we're not going to let somebody go because it's impossible to give them a fair trial. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was thinking in theory though.
think like Lindbergh kidnapping, O.J. Simpson, Leopold and Loeb, Menendez. Who was the guy who killed his wife and threw her in the San Francisco Bay? What was that guy's name?
Oh, with the children.
She was
they made
pregnant,
a
I think.
Netflix show about.
Yeah, I forget his name. Anyway, but
if Netflix is making a show about it, it was obviously big enough,
Right.
I'm drawing a blank on his name. Everybody, people, you guys know his name. Anyway, like those are huge cases that all were tried in the United States, and whether the trial was fair, who knows? But the trial happened, and this one will happen.
Mm-hmm.
So at the arraignment, the defense here apparently was already sort of laying the seeds or planting the seeds of a change of venue type of argument, saying it's not going to be possible to give my client a fair trial here in this jurisdiction. I think that will fall on deaf ears, but we shall see.
Mm-hmm.
And then, once he's out of that frying pan, he's back into the federal fryer, so that he's not going to get anywhere with that.
I could play the Koberger episode, though. You kind of said the exact same thing when I brought up the change of venue, too, though.
And they changed it.
Yeah,
they changed it. So who knows? But yeah, so at the arraignment, you can either enter a plea of guilty, not guilty. Sometimes it's you ask for a continuance to have your client evaluated for things like insanity.
Mm-hmm.
So you request additional time. If you don't think your client's competent and there might be some issues there, you ask for an evaluation. But yeah, generally speaking, arraignment's just procedure.
Okay.
And on the indictment, again, there'll probably be another discussion about bond and whether your client should be in or out. And then once you plead not guilty, the case goes. Discovery occurs. You file demands for discovery. The government has to give you information. The court conducts pretrial hearings if you're challenging evidence through motions or otherwise. And then ultimately, the case goes to trial. So that's what Mangione has in store for himself, not only now in state court, but also federal court. So it can happen, and it is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should track it. We should keep watching it.
Yep. So next update is just see what the federal side does, and then now state side discovery. It's going to be a long.
It'll be interesting to see if the feds get it together soon enough to avoid a prelim. But I'd love to see the preliminary hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this is Lawyer Talk. They don't teach you that in law school, Italian Mangione style. Luigi. Check us out, lawyertalkpodcast.com, where you can get a backlog of all our shows. You can ask your own questions. You can go to all the socials, leave comments. We get back to you there. If you got a topic you want us to cover, we will do it right here at Lawyer Talk, off the record, but on the air, at least until now. Hey, Steve Palmer here from Lawyer Talk. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Check us out, all our social media. Like, share, interact, ask your own questions. We're here for you.